Hello, Hope is Calling friends. I have a story to share. This story is about something that was one of the most difficult things that I've ever been through, but which God turned into one of the most life-changing, in a good way, experiences that I've ever gone through. So this was back in 2014, and I'm going to set the stage a little bit in the lead up. So in October or September of that year, my husband changed jobs. He had been with the same company for, gosh, I don't know how many years, 15 years, 18 years, something like that, and went to work for a new local company. That included a drop in income, but we thought that it was worth it because he would get to be home a lot more. To see and be part of our kids' lives a lot more when they were in high school, middle school. So we did that, and then in September, and then in October, the next month, he suddenly wound up in ICU, very, very suddenly. It was AFib, his heart was going nuts, and he was only in the hospital for less than 24 hours, but we were blindsided by the medical bills that can rack up in less than 24 hours. So when November happened, we were there with decreased income and a whole bunch of huge medical bills rolling in that were making us go, wow. And then in the middle of November, Ohio had a very sudden freak snowstorm out of the blue. We don't very often get snow in November, and when we do, it's usually just flurries a little bit. So when I left the house with my daughter, I was taking her to orchestra practice because she was in middle school and doing a youth orchestra she was a part of. She plays the violin. So it was time for practice, and in that evening, and we hopped in the car. Let me give you a little bit of background on the car. This car was just a little Chevy HHR, which there are a lot of people that don't have very high opinions of them. But that was my little HHR, and I loved it. My husband had gotten it for me 4 or 5 years before, 3 or 4, I don't remember how many years before it was. But after many years of minivans and so forth, I was really wanting a smaller car, but one that could still haul a lot. And my husband at that time, he was, I want to get you a car that you like, not just a car for whatever, a car that we have to get. And I can't really remember the details too much, but I do remember searching, and that HHR was the manual, which I didn't like the automatic HHRs, but I loved the manual. I'm one of those people. Anyway, I loved that car. So my daughter and I hopped in the car that November evening, late afternoon, to go to orchestra practice. And as I left the house, it started flurrying a little bit, and I didn't think anything of it, really. It flurries in November sometimes. But by the time I had gotten about 10 minutes or so, 10-15 minutes down the road, it had turned into a much thicker snowfall, but it was still wet because the ground was warm. And I did not know that black ice was forming. It turned out to be an evening that, the news talked about accidents everywhere at that time. It was just, the roads very quickly turned horrible. And I wasn't even going that fast because the snow started coming down so quickly. But we were driving, and 1 minute I was driving along slowly, and doing fine. And the next minute, I had lost control of the car, and the car was sliding into oncoming traffic in the other lane. And there was a car headed towards me, and nothing, braking did absolutely nothing. And it was kind of happening in slow motion because I wasn't going too fast, and neither were they. And so, I remember, even now, this many years later, I remember what that looked like in slow motion, my car slowly sliding into oncoming traffic. And I remember my daughter screaming, "Mommy," next to me, because she saw that we were suddenly headed towards a car. And then I'm honestly not sure at all how we missed that car. Somehow we did, and slid off the road on the other side. And I remember realizing that I was headed towards a telephone pole and a fire hydrant. And I remember thinking, neither one of these are going to be good. I wonder which one it's going to be. And then the last thing I remember thinking before we hit was, okay, this is going to be the telephone pole. This might not be good. And in that moment when I thought that, through my mind flashed hundreds of stories that you read on the news where somebody's car got wrapped around the telephone pole and it killed them. And here I am with me and my daughter in the car, and a little part of me knew there was a chance that we were about to die. But we didn't. Just that was the thought. I had enough, it happened in slow motion enough that I had enough time to think those things, but I didn't have enough time to reason through the fact that I hadn't actually been traveling that fast. And most of those times when someone gets killed hitting a telephone pole, they're usually going a lot faster. And, I didn't have time to reason through all of that. It was just, those were the progression of thoughts that I had. I thought this might not be good. And then we hit, the airbag blew up in our faces. And my next thought was, okay, that wasn't as bad as I thought. And, I got out of the car and started doing the things that you do. And a policeman showed up extremely quickly. I have no idea who called them. I called my husband and so forth. And at the time, it seemed rather anticlimactic. But what that accident did to me totally took me by surprise, because I've been in other car accidents before. Most notably one when soon after I got my license when I was 17 or something like that, I got T-boned. And but that accident happened so fast, I didn't have any memories of it, really, and I still don't have any memories of it. This one happened in slow motion, and in the days that followed that car accident, I fell apart in ways that I had never experienced before, due to car accidents or anything else, really. I've always been a very confident, capable person in general, on top of things. It's just kind of, who I am. And I've always been very confident, but I lost every shred of confidence that I had ever had. I was just even thinking and getting through a day somehow became impossible, or felt impossible. And that didn't make any sense to me, which somehow made it even worse. And I did a blog post on my website in the days after in November of 2014, if you want to look up and see what I wrote at the time. It just shook me up in a way that other previous car accidents hadn't, and that nothing ever had. And it did more beyond that. I remember not too long after I had to drive down to church for something, and for whatever reason, I was just lost my composure and I was shaking and trembling. And by the time I got to church, I was just sobbing and in tears. And, the other ladies were comforting me. I was just so shook up, even though the roads were dry and the roads were fine. But then other times could drive like normal. And, so many things that normally I could handle on a day-to-day basis without any problem suddenly just seemed impossible. I felt like my brain was stuck on repeat, reliving those few terrible seconds over and over and over again, hearing my daughter scream "mommy" next to me and being absolutely powerless to do anything to comfort her, avoid the accident that was clearly coming, any of that. And at some point, I don't even remember what led me to it, but I wound up reading about post-traumatic stress disorder and how a lot of times it hits people in situations when they weren't hurt physically, but it seemed like they should have been, which pretty much described me. My daughter and I had very minor whiplash, which healed pretty well and quickly. But it was just that it kept replaying in my mind over and over again. And it's hard to describe now, years later. I remember what I felt like, and I journaled about it, I wrote about it. But it's hard to adequately describe how I actually felt, because I never felt like that before. And just the total level of powerlessness, and how even everyday things, I couldn't handle them. And I didn't know why I couldn't handle them. It didn't make any sense to me that I couldn't handle them, because I knew this isn't a big deal. My reasoning part of my mind would tell me that how I was feeling made no sense. And somehow that made it even worse. So I went back to something that I've done ever since my mom did it for me as a child, and I would turn on audio recordings of the scriptures and the Psalms, and I would just let those verses wash over me of God being there for me and caring for me and comforting me and carrying me through. And that's the only thing I knew to do, was just to keep throwing myself on God's mercy and saying, God, when we are weak, you are strong, and I'm weaker than I ever have been in my entire life. I am so weak, I don't even know myself. I remember telling my husband, I don't know who I am. I feel like I'm not the same Katie that I've lived with, that I've known my whole entire life. I've suddenly become this completely different, helpless person, and I don't know what to do with myself. That's what the car accident did to me, for whatever reason. But looking back, I'm going to say that God allowed it to do it with me, because He used it to teach me things that have been priceless. Because in those days afterwards of just throwing myself on God, I had to throw myself on His mercy and rely on Him more than I ever had in my whole life. And I started realizing that most of my life, even though I said I depended on God, most of the time I was really just depending on myself because I'd always been so capable. So I didn't need God. I didn't need God to help me get through a day. I didn't need God to help me fulfill my work duties. I didn't need God to help me manage the projects at work. I knew how to do that. Well, suddenly I needed God for all of those things and more. And He started showing me how brilliantly He can take care of things. I remember one day just realizing I needed to reschedule a doctor's appointment. I don't remember if it was a doctor's appointment for me or for my husband. I don't remember what the doctor's appointment was for. I just remember that even the thought of calling the doctor's office was overwhelming to me, even though I knew that made no sense. Calling a doctor's office should be no big deal, but it was overwhelming to me. And I sort of developed this mental picture where I had my desk of the things that was my job. And due to this car accident, my desk had shrunk to the size of a postage stamp. But God shared the same office, and his desk was huge and massive. And so the mental picture that I started using as I prayed and talked with God and leaned on him in this time was these things that were too big for my desk to handle. I would carry them over to his desk and put them on his desk and say, God, I can't handle this, so here, you're going to have to do it. And that's what I did with the doctor's appointment that I needed to cancel. And I don't remember if it was the same day or the next day, but like out of the blue, the doctor called me for something. It wasn't the appointment reminder because the appointment was farther out than that. It was something else, but they called me just for some random question, it seemed like at the time. And I didn't have to, and it was suddenly so easy. It was like God said, here you go. Here they are on the line. And I rescheduled the doctor's appointment. Easy as that. I didn't have to go look up their phone number. I didn't have to wait through phone trees. I didn't have to figure out whatever it was that was making it overwhelming to me. It was just suddenly done because I put it on God's desk. And through all of these little teeny tiny things, I started learning how to rely on God for things that before that experience, it would never have occurred to me to even try to rely on God for. And it kind of all, I trusted, I believed that God was going to heal me, that God was going to heal my heart, my emotions, that he was going to walk me through this and out the other side. And he definitely did do that. And one of the biggest example that I want to share is, my car. It was totaled. So that meant I needed to go car shopping. And, so there we were, like I shared, we were already had lower funds and we were already facing all these huge hospital bills. And we needed to buy another car now at the same time. It was just, again, it just added to even more. I was like, God, I can't do this. I've never really liked dealing with car salesmen. I don't know, maybe some people do. But talk about, if the phone call was overwhelming, then I'm sure you can imagine how overwhelming the thought of car shopping was. So the car was totaled, the insurance cut us a check, and we had to go find another car. And my husband was like, well, I'm sorry your car got totaled. I still want this next one to be a car that you really like too. So what do you want? And so, I was like, do I want another HHR? I loved that one. But at the same time, I didn't want to rush into a decision. So I considered other cars. I remember I went to a dealership to try out one car, and I told the dealer that I was not going to buy a car that day. I said, I said, I have a headache. I went through a car accident a week and a half ago, or a week ago, however long it was. I'm not going to buy one today, so don't pressure me into it. But I want to test drive that car because I need more time to think about what kind of car I want to get, but I feel like I can't even consider this car until I've test drove one and seen, what they feel like to drive. He was not accommodating. He let me drive the car, but it took 2 hours, and I was like on the verge of tears before the thing was even over because it was just, he kept trying to pressure me, and I kept telling him, I told you I'm not going to buy a car today, and it was not fun. I looked up a bunch of cars online and bookmarked cars that were for sale. I was looking for more HHRs, and it's not easy to find ones that were manual because I knew I still don't want an automatic one. And there weren't very many, and quite a few of them were, they were expensive enough that if we put down what the insurance gave us, and of course I had to fill out a new loan application with our credit union, but I did it through the credit union because that was at least simpler and easier than a lot of other methods would have been. But a lot of the cars were still enough that, it looked like it was going to increase our monthly payments, which I wouldn't want to do. And so I tried working through this little bit by little bit when I felt like I had the mental aptitude to do it. But there's plenty of times where just 5-10 minutes of thought and I just feel completely overwhelmed again and would have to put it down and walk away and think about it later. But one of the cars that I had bookmarked was another HHR. It was a couple years newer than mine had been. It was, I think, the last year they made them, if I recall correctly. And it was like 100 miles from our house. And the price was quite a bit lower than the others. And according to my husband, that indicated it probably had problems. It had been on the market for a while, and according to the website. And so I kind of dismissed it. If something's too good to be true, it probably seems too good to be true. It probably is. So I kind of dismissed it. But at first, even I was just part of the ones that I had bookmarked. And besides, that was a ways to drive and so forth. But after I did that test drive at the local dealership for a different make and model car and went back home, I remember pulling up those cars and I just felt a tug towards that one that I bookmarked 100 miles away. And it was almost like God was whispering, "That's your car." I didn't know how to recognize God's voice back then, to the degree that I knew God was saying, "That's your car." It was just more kind of like a tug that kind of felt that way. I was like, "God, should I look more at that?" And I looked at it another time, and there was one or two little things with my old HHR that I hadn't cared for quite as much, even though I still loved the car. And I noticed that car, the newer model, had changed them. And I was like, "Oh, I think maybe I would like to look at this car. Oh, but it's 100 miles away, and I don't want to deal with the dealership, and why is the price so low? What kind of problems does it have? And blah, blah, blah." And then I go back to it the next day and looked at it again, and then I noticed that it actually had a 2-year, it was certified, so it had an extra 2-year warranty on it. I was like, well, it can't be in bad condition if it's certified, but, well, you still never know. They do that all the time for cars. But I called the dealership up and I talked with a really nice lady who was really sweet, and she said, I'll have somebody go out and check it over and look it over and everything. And she gave me more information, and I don't remember, this was so many years ago, I don't remember the details of the conversation. I just know that she made me feel comfortable, and she was very sweet and very kind. And somehow I came to the decision, you know what? This is the car that I want. I'm going to get this car. And, my husband was warning me, there's probably problems with it. The price is just too cheap. Because it was about $2,000 cheaper than most. $2,000-$3,000, something like that. Less than most of the other ones for that year and mileage that HHR was. But the more I looked into it, the more I talked with the lady, the more I just started getting a certainty in my heart. And of course, I've been praying about this whole time. God, what car do I get? Where's my car? What do I need to look? And as I started talking with that lady, I started almost at some point I started to get the feeling that God had gone car shopping for me. And, but this was all a very gradual, God help, I have to trust you. It was very much there was no booming voice from heaven of God saying, I got it. It was very much a me struggling and saying, God, I have no choice but to trust that you're leading me. I have no choice but to rely on you. I have no choice but to ask your help. We need a car. There's nothing else that's appealing to me, so I guess it's this one. So I'm just gonna keep trusting, and that's what the process looked like. So I started making arrangements to buy this car if it was good when we got down there. And I remember thinking about the fact that I was pretty much I was just going to buy it at their asking price. And at the same time, I was like, this is so absurd. Who does that? Car dealers will always go down in price for you. But I just, like, I can't do it. I don't have the wherewithal. I don't have it in me to even ask to look for a lower price, like, and haggle like I usually do. It is what it is. I need a car, and this is the only one, and I'm trusting God, so the price is what it is. So the lady had all of our information. She knew we were coming. She knew we were going to buy it. We had a draft, and we were going to buy it as long as we didn't find problems with it when we got down there. And but I needed to get the VIN number for the bank or the insurance, so I pulled up the listing on the website and looked at it, and my jaw dropped because the price had dropped. They dropped like another $500 off the price, which I don't remember how much the car was. It was, an older car, so $500 was a decent, if I'm even remembering accurately, that was $500. Whatever the case is, I was astounded that they had voluntarily dropped to the price on a car that they already knew they had a buyer for. And I felt like somehow I knew, and I got the impression that God had done the haggling for me. That's when I started feeling for sure, okay, this is my car. God went shopping for a car for me. And I called up the lady. I said, here's the information that you needed. And I noticed they brought the price on the website down, and she was like, oh yeah, let me update all the paperwork for you to reflect that lower price. And she did all of that for me. And, so we get down there the evening, it's time to go. And my husband's like, I hope you're not disappointed. These cars are, you always find problems with a car that, you don't buy a car sight unseen. I'm sure that we're going to get there and there's going to be problems, But I was just like, no, in my overwhelmed state, I'm not worried about that. I think God went shopping for me and picked out the car. It'll be fine. And I can't say I had, don't get the impression that I had this amazing faith, because I didn't. I had no choice but to trust God. That was the state that my mind and emotions and that I was in. It was not some crazy level of faith. It was, when you fall, you land on what you land on. And maybe you can choose what way to fall. And I had chosen to fall back on God, and that was it. I had no strength. No, I didn't feel like I had crazy faith. I was just trusting, because that's what my life had become. Nothing more than trusting God for the next thing, the next minute, the next hour, because beyond that was more than I could handle. So we got in the car, we drove 100 miles to the dealership. Oh wait, I forgot a part. I gotta back up a little bit. After I talked with this lady, after I talked with her and she lowered the price, I remember I was driving back. I had to fax the paperwork and draft and stuff to her. And I got in the car, and a song came on from Francesca Battistelli. It was the one, I Don't Need My Name in Lights. I'm famous in my Father's eyes. I can't even think of the words off the top of my head, but it goes, I am loved. And when when those words came on, I just felt like God had wrapped me up and kissed me and hugged me and said, it's okay. I've got you. I went car shopping for you. I found the car for you. I brought the price down for you just because. I've got you. I'm taking care of you, and it's going to be okay. And I just felt, I mean, even now, all these years later, when I hear that song come on somewhere, I don't hear it very often anymore, but when I do hear it, it brings me right back to that moment when God was just demonstrating his love for me. So when we went down there, my husband was like, I don't know, buying a car when you haven't seen it, I'm sure we're going to find something. I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. And I was like, I don't think I'm going to be disappointed. God went car shopping for me. And we got down there, and it was by far the easiest car purchase I have ever even heard of in my entire life. We walked in there. The lady brought us to the car almost immediately. We went for a test drive. I drove it and I was still shaky from driving, but it was a manual HHR. It felt comfortable and familiar, and I loved it. And it had those features that the previous one didn't have that I wanted. My husband test drove it, and he put it through the courses and pushed the engine and transmission and everything better to make sure everything. He took out his flashlight, and he worked in the auto industry, so he knew places to look on cars for evidence of problems that most people don't. And he looked that thing over with a flashlight in every little crevice and everything. And he comes to me and says, well, this car appears to be in remarkably good condition with no problems whatsoever. And I was like, of course, God picked it out. So we walked back there with the draft, and I think it was like less than 45 minutes total. It was just so fast. Hand him the stuff, sign it, pick up the keys, walk out. We were back on our way home. Totally unlike what buying a car is usually like. We bought that car faster than the visit at the other dealer. It was just amazing. And looking back, I owned that car for 5 years. I sold it in 2019. And in 5 years of owning that car, my husband had to change out some little tiny switch part that didn't cost very much money at all for the backup lights that went out. And I put on a set of tires at one point, and I think we changed the brakes once. And other than oil changes, that is the only maintenance that car needed for the entire 5 years that I owned it. It was amazingly free of problems. And when I sold it in 2019, I just felt like it was time to move on to a newer car, and I was glad to be able to sell it to someone else who was looking for a manual HHR, and he wanted an older one, and I got a good price for it. And the whole experience was just amazing. And when we got back home and I pulled out my paperwork from the dealership and looked at it again, up there at the top of the paperwork was a big, huge red heart, because the dealer's name, it turned out, and I hadn't even been aware of this, was Valentine. Valentine Buick, Valentine Chevy, whatever it was. And I just felt like it was God's stamp of love for me. It was, again, an echo of that, I've got you, you are loved. And just the enormity of what he did for me So I wound up having that car, and the monthly payments were less than the previous one had been. um, Another little funny side note is the previous one had not had running boards, and just the way HHRs were made, if you rocks have a tendency to catch the fronts where it bumps out in front of the wheels and chip up the paint a lot. So I decided that if I got a new HHR, I wanted it to have running boards, just because it protects those parts where it bumps out, and you have less paint chips and stuff. Not so much for look or being fancy or whatever, more just for the practicality of it. And the car didn't have running boards, but like the next day I hopped online to look, and closer than the actual car was somebody on eBay selling a set of running boards. And my husband was like, they're not going to be the right color. And then he was like, and what about installation? We're going to have to drill holes. And I was like, no, it's fine. I don't think that's going to be a problem. And it wasn't. God even provided running boards. They were the perfect factory color. The holes and the clips were already there, which, they'd been there to begin with. But, my husband knows cars, and that surprised him that it was, it took him like 20 minutes or less to install them on my car. And it was just like factory. It was perfect. So God just proved his love and what he could care for me in so many ways during that period of my life. And as time went by, I regained my confidence again, but I've never been the same. And in the years that followed, as I, for example, moved up into management, even higher up into management, and the company I worked with at the time, there were many times, situations where the old Katie would have gotten stressed out, would have gotten worried, because I would have assumed that I needed to use my management abilities to make sure that deadlines were met and objectives were achieved and so forth. But the Katie that went through that experience and learned to just trust God for directions and turn things over to him, learned to face all of those with, well, Lord, what do I do? This is on your desk because this is beyond me. So show me what my part is. And it was amazing. Time after time after time, just in what became my everyday life, I learned to trust him. Sometimes I would not be able to meet a deadline, and I prayed, and I learned not to stress about deadlines, because if I prayed and was relying on God and I couldn't meet the deadline, then it pretty much always meant the deadline didn't actually have to be met. Sometimes the deadline would come and I didn't meet it, and somebody else would last minute change the deadline or cancel the whole project. And it was like, oh, I'm glad I didn't waste time trying to do it. God, you knew that I didn't actually have to make that deadline. I can't even really articulate all the ways, but that whole period of my life when I was forced to rely on God for everything taught me after that how even when I regained my old self and confidence back, I still had the choice of whether I wanted to rely on myself or whether I wanted to rely on God. And relying on God is so much better than even a capable self. So much better. Because he knows the future. He knows what's needed. I learned to take things in stride and not to stress and obsess about things. I learned to shrug things off. I learned to, and shrug things off sounds wrong, but it was putting things on God's desk. I learned to do that for the situations of my life. I would do it, and I still do, when it comes to making dinner, getting a project done around the house, working through something that arises, financial needs, anything. His desk can handle whatever stuff you put on it. And so that's my story, and I hope it encourages somebody. For me, it was life changing, but for people listening, I want other people to find hope, to realize that this is an example of what the Bible means when it says God turns things for good for those that are called according to his purpose. That this is an example of how he turns something around. Because looking back, if I could have stopped that car accident and not gone through that, if I had the choice to go back in time and change that, I wouldn't. I would say, nope, I'll go through the car accident again. Because what God taught me through it was priceless. And so that's the hope and the encouragement that I want anyone listening to this today to gain. That whatever you're in the middle of, hold on to God. Turn it over to him. Everything. Turn your whole life over to him. Give him your weakness. Give him your struggles. Throw yourself on God's mercy and just say, God, I trust you. I'm going to trust you. And it's okay if it's desperation because that's all you feel you can do. That's what it was for me. God had to pretty much force me to it. But since then, I mean, like I said, I've never been the same. And there are so many times when I constantly walk through life and I recognize and I realize that the way that I'm handling this situation, that situation, lots of situations now is different and so much better than it would have been if I hadn't gone through that and God hadn't taught me those things. So that's all I have to share, and this got much longer than I intended, but I do hope that the story encourages someone, maybe lots of someone's. God loves you. God knows right where you're at. He knows your weakness. He knows your struggles. And he's got the strength to carry all of those burdens. He's got the strength to carry you. He wants to carry you because he loves you. And ask him to show you how to fall back on his mercy and his grace, how to relax and rest in his arms. And ask him to open your eyes to see what he's doing and what he's wanting to teach you. Because I think if I had chosen not to trust God and not to rely on him in that situation, there's a chance I would have made it through and not received what I did out of it. I mean, it was my choice. It is our choice whether or not to look to God in our struggles and how much to rely on him and how not to rely on him. It's a heart thing. It's not a mind thing. It's a heart thing. And so that's always what I encourage people to do. Just keep looking to God. Keep seeking to know him. Know this God who loves you and will give anything and everything for you. But he also knows what's best for you. And he knew in my story, he knew that allowing my car to hit black ice was the best thing for me. Because he knew all of the things that he wanted to show me and how to rely on him. And he knew I wasn't going to learn him any other way. I had to go through that in order to have to learn it. And therefore, letting me get in that car accident was best for me. And we've got to let God be God. We've got to not put him into our box and think that we know better than he does what's best for us. But when we can let go and surrender to him, he will do amazing things in our life. So that's my story, and many blessings upon you and your day and your situation, and your walk with God.